Very good to be here, friends. This is going to be our the seventh and the last installment in the presentation of the study of the Kitab Bayán Farsi. Today, we're going to be covering Váḥid 8 and 9, or book 8 and 9, and let's go to it. Book 8, or the 8th Váḥid is the fourth longest book of the Bayán Farsi. In the Tam edition, it starts on page 272 and ends on page 311. Excuse me, making it about 39 pages in length, with each page consisting of 19 handwritten lines. In the Nicolas French translation, book 8 is 77 pages long, and it ranges from pages 63 to 140, which takes up about 45% of the volume, of the fourth volume of Le Bayán Persan. Only 6 excerpts from this Váḥid have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, and they are namely from chapters 1, 9, 14, 16, and 19. There are actually 2 excerpts from chapter 19. Now, I wanted to just share with you all the chapters and all the way that the structure is. I could have introduced this earlier, but it begins Al-Bab al-Awwal min al-Wahid al-Thamin. This is the titles, or the numbering is in Arabic, and the exordium, the title of it, or the first couple of lines of each chapter of the Persian Bayán is in Arabic, and then the elaboration, or the main body of the chapter, is in Persian. So in this case, it begins the first gate from the 8th Váḥid, and then this chapter consists of about 26 handwritten lines in the original language. The first chapter of book 8 begins with these words: "On that verily the action of him whom God shall make manifest, in comparison to the action of others, is like the contrast between the brilliance of the sun to the brilliance of the stars." The Bab continues: "The substance of this gate or chapter is that the acts of him whom God shall make manifest are like unto the sun, while the works of men, provided they conform to the good pleasure of God, resemble the stars or the moon." And this section has been translated, obviously, from by the Baha'i World Center, and it's been published in selections from the writings of the Bab. Now, 7 lines later in the same chapter, the Bab adds, "Thus should the followers of the Bayán observe the precepts of him whom God shall make manifest at the time of his appearance, and regard themselves and their own works as the stars, exposed to the light of the sun. Then they will have gathered the fruits of their existence, otherwise the title of luminary." Now, in the translation, selections from the writings, it has starship. I couldn't really figure out why, and there was really no, I mean, starship has a very different connotation, especially in the modern time. It's basically like a spaceship, alien spaceship. That's what it conjures in that. But really, the word is kokabiyat. And kokabiyat is, in my opinion, it's best translated as luminary. So otherwise, the title of luminary will not apply to them. Rather, it will apply to such as truly believe in him, to those who pale into insignificance in the daytime and gleam forth with light in the night season. Such indeed is the fruit of this precept, should anyone observe it on the day of resurrection. This is the essence of all learning and of all righteous deeds, should anyone but attain unto it. Had the peoples of the world fixed their gaze upon this principle, no exponent of divine revelation would ever have, at the inception of any dispensation, regarded them as things of naught. However, the fact is that during the night season, everyone perceiveth the light which he himself, according to his own capacity, giveth out, oblivious that at the break of day this light shall fade away and be reduced to utter nothingness before the dazzling splendor of the sun. The Bab then continues, the light of the people of the world is their knowledge and utterance, while the splendors shed from the glorious acts of him whom God shall make manifest are his words, through whose potency he rolleth up the whole world of existence, sets it under his own authority by relating it unto himself. Then, as the mouthpiece of God, the source of his divine light, exalted and glorified be he, proclaimeth, verily, verily, I am God, no God is there but me. In truth, all others except me are my creatures. Say, O my creatures, me alone, therefore, should ye fear. In chapter 2, the Bab outlines the provisions for the law of inheritance. The statutes and particulars of the inheritance law in the Bayán is quite detailed and complex and is definitely beyond our concise study. However, it's worth noting that in the Kitab al-Aqdas, Baha'u'lláh has revised and simplified the Bayanic law of inheritance. Since no parts of this chapter has been translated or discussed anywhere else, we're just going to leave it the way it is. With 84 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 2 is the third longest chapter of book 8. Moving on to chapter 3. Chapter 3 begins with these words, on that verily after the appearance of the manifestation of God, all things shall perish except his countenance. This is a reference to a verse from the Quran. In the day of resurrection, it is incumbent upon every soul to appear before him in person and ask forgiveness from that divine tree, unless he or she has a real excuse that prevents them from appearing before him in person. The substance of this gate, the Bab continues, is that undoubtedly the day of resurrection shall come and the tree of truth will be manifested. Something that I want to point out here that, again, the later Babis who did not come to recognize Baha'u'lláh as him whom God shall make manifest were really in a grievous error, is if they had read the Bayán. You will see repeatedly that the Bab makes mention of the imminent appearance of him whom God shall make manifest. Now, some of those who have said, no, him whom God shall make manifest is going to appear much later on, and some are still waiting for his appearance. They're in such error because the Bab, shows and in his words that people, the current believers, could be living at that time, meaning that it's going to be within their lifetime. He says that if you're going to be alive, I mean, you will be. He does not say that it's going to be such a long time that many of you are not going to be around. He actually says most of you are going to be around, so it makes it very personal that it is coming, it is very imminent, and hence any denial of the fact that it's going to appear imminently is against what the Bab had stipulated throughout the Persian Bayán. Later in this chapter, while discussing the question of conclusive proof or testimony, the Bab writes, beware that each revelation, which is a revelation of God, is unlike any manifestation of the creatures. Likewise, the testimony of God is a conclusive proof, the like of which all the dwellers on earth will ever be powerless to produce, until the divine dispensation advances in such wise that the people can recognize the revelation through the essence of truth. At that time, the very dawning of the light of the Sun of Truth testifieth by itself unto his revelation. It is then that recognize God through God is realized. For until the present, all that hath been manifested is recognize God through his testimony. Here, the intention is not that recognized through God is an inconclusive testimony. Do not therefore be veiled from the origin of the cause. Nay, rather, the dispensation advanceth to such an extent that those who glorify God in the concourse on high will recognize their beloved in each revelation through himself. Indeed, they would recognize the testimony through him rather than him through the testimony. Know thou that the recognition of God is in the station of recognize God through God will not be affirmed save through recognize the letters of the primal unity. This excerpt was translated by Dr. Saidi in his book. In chapter 4, the theme of it is somewhat summarized in the opening sentence of the chapter, which reads, "On that exalted above all things is the primal point, and below it are the letters of the living, and below them are the rest of the people." In this chapter, the Bab provides a cogent commentary on the notion that in every revelation it is witnessed that the highest of people become the lowest, and the lowest are elevated to the highest rank. In other words, those with the greatest learning become, through their failure to recognize the manifestation of God, the least of creatures, while those with no learning or position become, on account of their belief, the most exalted of mankind. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. Chapter 4 consists of about 35 handwritten lines in the original language. Moving on to chapter 5. In chapter 5, the Bab enjoins upon those believers who could afford it to present gifts of precious stones, such as diamonds, emeralds, and rubies, to him whom God shall make manifest, and his letters of the living. Chapter 5 consists of about 18 handwritten lines in the original language. No parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. However, a short excerpt of this chapter has been translated by Dr. Saidi in his book. And this is it. Towards the end of chapter 5, the Bab writes, "It behooveth those who point to unity of essence, unity of attributes, unity of action, and unity of worship, to creation, sustenance, death, and life, to glorification, celebration of praise, exaltation of divine unity, and magnification, to fire, air, water, and earth, to heart, spirit, soul, and body, and to snow white light, green light, yellow light, and crimson light, to behold all beneath the shadow of the letters of, in the name of God, the most exalted, the most holy." Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas. Very fascinating. This is the opening invocation that began the Bayán, Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas, and the Bab had previously made a commentary on this Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas. So again, you'll see this Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas, in the name of God, the most exalted, the most holy, keep repeating itself, and its essence and mystery is somewhat unveiled by the Bab throughout the Persian Bayán. Chapter 6, moving on to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is entitled On the Practice of Personal Hygiene. In this chapter, the Bab continues his directives on the topic of cleanliness and refinement. We've seen that in the previous books, that he makes mention of refinement and cleanliness. Here again, the Bab continues on that theme, introducing a new dimension to it. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. At one point, it's worth noting, in this chapter, the Bab states that it is permissible and beloved in the sight of God if women and men should choose to tattoo a specific word on their chests. He writes that since every breast is the abode of the love of God, women could inscribe the phrase, O thou my God, Allahumma, and men could imprint the word, the merciful, Ar-Rahman, on their chests by way of the most excellent calligraphy. He further adds that should one wish to exceed these words with additional words, it would be permissible to do so. So I wanted to point this out. I mean, there has been a lot of questions about, especially in this era where body art, where tattooing has become very popular in Western society. It has been in many indigenous cultures throughout the world and have been around in Africa, in South Pacific. But you know, it has gained some popularity, and there has always been this controversy about whether it's, you know, it is okay to tattoo one's body. And I believe the House of Justice has been asked, and I'm just not speaking on the authority of the actual letter from the House, but I know someone who had asked. He had basically was paraphrasing that the House had said that they had not found any reference in the writings, in the Baha'i writings at least, that basically denounced or forbade any kind of tattooing and body art. So I think the precedent for this here, the Báb, sets the precedent, you know, and even though it's a previous revelation, this has not been abrogated by you know, Bahá'u'lláh, or I don't believe there's ever been any comments, or at least that I know of, by Abdul Baha or the beloved guardian. So again, I think it's left to the discretion of the individuals. In this case, I find this very fascinating, obviously, that the Báb specifically says in the chapter dealing with personal hygiene that, again, if you wanted to tattoo, now he doesn't say how big or how small, but it's being on the chest, and usually the chest is covered. It's not something that is displayed. At least it wasn't back then. So again, this is something on a more of a spiritual, personal level that an individual may partake in. So just thought to share that with you and point out what the Báb in fact states in the Bayán regarding this. Now, I'm sure this is going to create some questions at the end of this session. Moving on to elsewhere in the same chapter, the Báb writes, anything that may become a barrier to refinement hath been forbidden in the Bayán. So that's that there's a caveat in there. And also there is, you know, this is a general statement by the Báb. So chapter 6 consists of 37 handwritten lines in the original language. Moving on to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is entitled On the Printing Press and That Which Pertaineth Thereto. The chapter consists of about 23 handwritten lines in the original language. Unfortunately, no parts of the chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, nor Dr. Saidi have discussed this. The chapter begins with these words to just give you the substance of this gate or chapter is that permission hath been granted by God to print the Bayán and whatsoever may be written down under its authority until the advent of him whom God shall make manifest. So basically, various commentaries by some of the luminaries, you know, like Quddus, Tahireh, you know, unfortunately, they didn't get a chance to do that very extensively through the persecutions and their untimely deaths. But there are writings by some of the luminaries of the Bábí dispensation. So the Báb here says permission has been granted to print them because the printing press was becoming more and more popular. You know, even in the East at that time, it had been around for a long time, but it was not as popular. So hand transcription was very popular at that time during the time of in the 19th century Middle East still. And Um, Even though in elsewhere the Bab has stated that it is better to transcribe these with beautiful penmanship, and we're going to see some other references in the later chapters as well as in the next book of the Bayán regarding this. So again, so this chapter primarily talks about the printing press and that it is okay to print the writings and the whole generality of what is authoritative Bayanic text, if you will. Yes, so here the Bab, later in this chapter, the Bab writes, however, if someone is able to transcribe the Bayán in the most excellent calligraphy, it would be better for them than to be the possessor of a good printed edition of that book. So here the Bab prefers the hand transcription because it's a lot more personal, it's a lot more beautiful, it can be more exquisite, and it will have a personal touch as well. At one point during his commentary, the Bab makes this important affirmation about the Christian sacred scripture. I found this very fascinating. He writes, there is no doubt that the gospel hath been a book from God. So this is a direct confirmation by the Bab regarding the Gospels. Now, the words, and Baha'u'lláh talks about this also in Gems of Divine Mysteries and the Kitab-i-Iran as well, that the word of God will not be destroyed, and that the words of Jesus in the Gospels are truly the word of God. But this statement, which in Persian, very direct and explicit, شبهه نیست که انجیل کتاب خداوند بوده. There is no doubt that the gospel hath been a book from God. I thought that was a very fascinating quote to share with you. In chapter 8, the Bab issues 3 ordinances which primarily relate to men. He first grants permission for men to shave their heads if they so desire. And second, he makes it lawful for them to shave their facial hair as well. Back then, as you know, keeping one's facial hair, especially amongst the Muslims, it's considered a sign of honor. Finally, the Bab states that it would be permissible if one chooses to say their obligatory prayer while wearing an abba, but it would not be lawful for a man to wear a jubbah when he is reciting the obligatory prayer. So it's about 2 types of clothing. The Bab says abba is acceptable, but jubbah is not. So you can look into that yourself, what they are and what type of, you probably are a lot more familiar with abba because Abdul Baha used to wear it, Baha'u'lláh used to wear it as well. So later in the short chapter of 9 handwritten lines, this chapter, the Bab writes, all these rules are ordained for this purpose, that happily in the day of resurrection, naught shall be seen in the appearance and the inner reality of any soul save the love of God. Then those who are endued with true understanding of the meaning of symbols may realize that when God is not content with aught but love in relation to the accidental body, then how much more true would be his desire with regard to the essential bodies, souls, spirits, and the hearts, which are the seat of the revelation of the primal unity. So the physical body, he refers to it as an accidental body, and the essential bodies, the soul, spirit, and the hearts, which are the seat of the revelation of the primal unity. In the beginning of chapter 9, the Bab enjoins upon his followers to write a special testament in which they would outline their good and bad deeds from the beginning of the new revelation until the dawn of the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest. Later in the chapter, which consists of about 28 handwritten lines in the original language, the Bab elucidates further on the characteristics of the day of resurrection. This theme of the day of resurrection obviously is ubiquitous in the Persian Bayán, and every chapter the Bab seem to reveal a certain dimension of it and comments on it. It's just very, fascinating, but yet very mind-boggling, and the depth and the description and every commentary is fresh and new. You'll see that also with him whom God shall make manifest and the dimensions of it. So again, these central themes of the Persian Bayán, the day of resurrection, the various dimensions of revelation, the advent of him whom God shall make manifest, are constantly reoccurring throughout this magnificent holy book. Now, a portion of the Bab's commentary has been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center and is as follows. The day of resurrection is a day on which the sun riseth and setteth like unto any other day. How oft hath the day of resurrection dawned, and the people of the land where it occurred did not learn of the event. Had they heard, they would not have believed, and thus they were not told. When the apostle of God, Muhammad, appeared, he did not announce unto the believers that the resurrection had come, for they could not bear the news. That day is indeed an infinitely mighty day, for in it the divine tree proclaimeth from eternity unto eternity, verily I am God, no God is there but me. Yet those who are veiled believe that he is one like unto them, and they refuse even to call him a believer, although such a title in the realm of his heavenly kingdom is conferred everlastingly upon the most insignificant follower of his previous dispensation. Bab continues, thus had the people in the days of the apostle of God regarded him, at least as a believer of their time, how would they have debarred him for 7 years while he was in the mountain from access to his holy house, Kaaba? Likewise, in this dispensation of the point of the Bayán, if the people had not refused to concede the name believer unto him, how could they have incarcerated him on this mountain without realizing that the quintessence of belief oweth its existence to a word from him? Their hearts, the Bab continues, are deprived of the power of true insight, and thus they cannot see, while those endowed with the eyes of their spirit circle like moths round the light of truth until they are consumed. It is for this reason that the day of resurrection is said to be the greatest of all days, yet it is like unto any other day. Towards the end of chapter 9, the Bab exhorts his followers to look with the eye of thy heart, Ayn Fuad, that thou may not be veiled on that day of resurrection. This is also a reference in the writings of Bahá'u'lláh, that you must look with the eye of your heart, that it's basically that if you look deep into your heart and open your heart, that your spirit will resonate with the word of God, because we all have that propensity, we all have that quality built into our spiritual DNA, if you will. This chapter 9, this kind of concludes chapter 9 here for us. In chapter 10, the Bab encourages those of his followers who are raised and educated in a particular class of society to interact and associate with peoples of other classes. Unfortunately, no parts of this chapter have been translated into English, by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed by Dr. Saidi in his book. With only 9 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 10, together with chapter 8, are the shortest chapters of book 8. So this brings us to the end of part 1.